Chapter 18. Guarding Life. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 17. Thou shalt not kill. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 17. As we have seen, the commandment to honor one's parents is a requirement to honor life. In this word, thou shalt not kill, life is protected. It cannot be taken except on God's terms. As P.C. Craigie noted, the Decalogue was representative of God's love in that its injunctions, both negative and positive, led not to restriction of life, but to fullness of life. The law, however, is a burden to evil men, for as Calvin said, men would fain be exempted from all bondage. Men want only that their will be done. Anything else is for them slavery. Calvin said further, now, we must understand that the way for men to rule their lives well and orderly is to abstain from all evil-doing, injury and violence, and therewithal to live chastely and honestly without hurting or hindering of any man, and, on the other side, to keep their tongues from harming any man by any manner of falsehood and lying. All these good properties must be in us, if we will frame ourselves to God's will and righteousness. So then, it is not to be marvelled at that God should speak here of murders, for it is done to hold us in awe that we should not go about to do any outrage or harm to our neighbours. But yet, for all this, we must come back again to that which I have touched already, that is, to wit, that God speaketh after a rude and gross fashion to apply himself both to great and small, and even to the very idiots. For we see how every man excuseth himself by ignorance, and if a thing be somewhat dark and hard, we think we have wherewith to wash our hands of the matter. When we have done amiss, we think all is safe, if we can say, oh, it was too high and too profound for me. I understood never a whit of it. To the end, therefore, that men should have no such starting holes, God's will was to speak after such a fashion, as even little babes might understand what he said. That is the cause why he saith in short words, Thou shalt not be a murderer. Calvin held that this law requires men to abstain from all wrong and violence. He held that it is not enough for men to abstain from evil-doing, because the positive implication of the law is to love our neighbour and to be godly in our relationship with him. God's laws contain within them penalties for disobedience. We are told in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 8, He that diggeth a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh an hedge, a serpent shall bite him. Digging a pit has reference to a lawless attempt to ensnare a man. The man who does this will in time be trapped by his own evil. Farms in those days, and later in such countries as England, had hedge fences. Trees grew up in the hedge fence, which became a nesting place for birds, a refuge for small game, and a feeding ground for snakes. To break down a hedge fence at night to steal or to allow one's cattle to enter a neighbour's field meant that the trespasser was likely to get a snake bite. How true is this? Since World War II, we have, to a great extent, set aside the death penalty for most cases of murder. We have cheapened life, and murders have increased to a very high number. By making life easier for murderers and criminals generally, we have made it less tenable for ourselves. We have fallen into a pit of our making. We have broken the fence of God's law, and we have been smitten as transgressors. Another illustration. God's law, and for centuries civil law, requires a death penalty for homosexuality. This has been set aside in much of the world. What is the result? In San Francisco, the Reverend Charles McElhenney fired a homosexual organist and, in other ways, made clear his opposition to homosexuality. The church has been regularly defaced, and one murder attempt against him and his wife failed only because of an unexpected incident. However, the house was firebombed. Where we fail to follow God's law, the penalties turn on our society. If we deny the validity of God's law, its death penalties begin to operate against us. When we let murderers live, more people die. Craigy's comment is a valid one. The Ten Commandments manifest God's love, and they lead not to restriction of life, but to fullness of life. Modern man's disobedience is leading to severe restrictions on our lives. St. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 15 and 16, "But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. Yet, if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf." The word suffer means to experience passion and strong feelings. The first two offences cited by Peter are very specific: murderer and thief. Then, evildoer in general. Peter is speaking of not only the acts of murder and theft, but the desire to kill or rob someone who offends us. The last sin is revealing. A busybody in other men's affairs, that is, a meddler who interferes by talk or action in the lives of others. If, rather, our passion in actual suffering or fellow feeling be as a Christian, we are to glorify God. Our lives are then in harmony with Him. Peter speaks here in part about the temper of our lives, in thoughts and action. The first murder of Abel by Cain is the root of all murder. It is the desire to be one's own God, Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, and it is the hatred of God because He is God and not us. The more men hate God, the more they hate others and themselves. In Isaiah chapter 45, verse 5, we read, "I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me." Hence the commandment, "Thou shalt have none other gods before me." Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 7. When men seek to be their own God, they not only deny the living God, but also the right of all other men to any life in contradiction to themselves. A total intolerance of differences is then inevitable. In effect, such men are demanding of all others, including their own families, "Bow down and worship me." The will to murder is a denial of God's sovereignty and of the God-given grace of life given to other persons. Ungodly hatred is very often a safe way of expressing vengeance and committing murder. The inwardness of this law is stressed in both the Old and New Testaments. To cite only a few verses, "Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. I am the Lord." Leviticus chapter 19, verses 17 and 18. "If thou see the ass of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him." Exodus chapter 23, verse 5. "Thou shalt not see thy brother's ass or his ox fall down by the way, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt surely help him to lift them up again." Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 4. "Whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer, and ye know that no murderer hath eternal life abiding in him." 1 John chapter 3, verse 15. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. Romans chapter 13, verse 8. It is important to call attention to a qualification made by Calvin in terms of God's law. What is here forbidden in the sixth commandment is unjust violence. The protection of our lives and property from violent and lawless men means that at times we must kill them. This is not a pacifist law. What is required is godly peace, and lacking that, godly conduct. We are, in fact, guilty of breaking this law if we allow the earth to become polluted by innocent human blood. Compare Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 1 to 9. Calvin held that we then implicate ourselves in the guilt. All 10 commandments are very brief when compared with modern statutes. The 6th, 7th, and 8th are especially brief, and the first 3 words in the English out of our 4 in commandments 6 and 8, 5 and 7 are, Thou shalt not. No words are wasted, nor is time spent vindicating the law. The context of all God's law is the totality of the Bible. This provides more than enough explanation and understanding. This is not true of U.S. federal law, nor of any state or county laws or administrative laws issued by any status agency on any level. In such cases, there is no uniform or stable context. As a result, some acts of Congress run frequently to 500 or more pages, all unreadable and also unread by those who pass them. They have no clear, unchanging context. The Bible alone gives that. Supposedly, acts of Congress are in conformity to the U.S. Constitution, but the Constitution has become a fluid and meaningless piece of putty, made to mean whatever the federal government decrees. Such is not law, but the fiat of our new sultans.